Chapter 4, The Fishmonger, 2019. Scene 11, Phillip. Phillip stared at Arnold when he reached the bottom of the gangway. Noting his short, belligerent movements, it wasn't clear whether the boy's intent was to insult or to compete with the baggage steward. Still, his spiteful attitude toward work was an odd compliment to the air of indifference oozing off of James Harrington. Having been silent throughout the flight, the two were like cursed dolls whose only purpose was to remind Phillip of his past. This wasn't the way he wanted to start moving day, and Phillip could not wait to be rid of them. When he climbed into the Sprinter van-style limousine, the seating arrangement was similar to the Jets, so he took the spot furthest in the back to avoid his father's foul odor. Once the bags were loaded, the limo was quiet as a hearse as they pulled away from Logan International. Holding his breath throughout the 15-minute trip, Phillip didn't relax until they rounded the corner of Harvard Street and Massachusetts Avenue. The sun beamed through the window, warming his face, while leafy sidewalks crammed with students played in the glass like a silent movie. The campus contained his future, Phillip was certain about that. His peers could be forgiven for assuming the imprimatur of his last name guaranteed success. He was a smart kid and had a positive attitude now that he was with Ellie. The world of real money, though, was all about who you knew, and Phillip was painfully aware of entering that world without a reputational leg up. Like an underweight infant born in Sparta, he was tossed to the stones when it was announced during the summer that Thomas had been chosen to run their father's hedge fund. His older brother was tall and athletic, like Victoria Harrington, a woman who delighted in flaunting the fear she sparked in other elites. Phillip had her green eyes, her blonde hair, and her delicate features, the very attributes that his lecherous father valued in their vacuous mother. The physical traits that led the family to assume a boy was weak would have been superpowers in a girl. Ironically, the thought had always left Phillip with a sense of shame, as if he was culpable of the crime of being the family's cute, mild-mannered son. Phoebe, a daughter's name that surely would have appealed to a mother who was used to wielding her looks like a weapon, would have been treated like a diva, especially if she was also a selfish bitch. The twisted emotional landscape created by James and Victoria Harrington had caused hate and guilt to wage war in Phillip. Seething with tension as Thayer Hall came into view, he wished with all his heart that one or the other would finally win out. He waited for the bags to be transferred to the lobby before stepping out of the limo. When the car drove away, Arnold turned and shared a nod with Phillip's father. As the boy strode across the yard, Phillip remembered the one thing James Harrington said throughout the entire trip. "The man you want to see is Talbot. The room key. Get that from him." James Harrington's simple act of authority triggered a crack in the 19-year-old dam that had formed in Phillip. Was his father going to show him around campus, introduce his favorite professors, offer advice on making friends? With hope swelling in his chest, Phillip looked around, desperate for a way to break the silence. His heart beat a little faster when he noticed the clubs being carried into the dorm by a group of students. Golf was a sure winner with his father, but before Phillip could comment, he heard his older brother's voice over his shoulder. "Slim pickings today," Thomas said. Their father's eyes lit up, as if for him, the world had only just appeared. "There you are," James Harrington said, pausing to pan the yard like a periscope. "I believe you're right." He scowled. "Perhaps the pretty ones will come later." Thomas wasn't supposed to be there. Upperclassmen didn't arrive until the following week. Phillip felt sick, but he was determined not to give his older brother the satisfaction of seeing his disappointment. Thomas was physically imposing but dumb, and Phillip had survived this bullying by being smart, emotionally strong, and strategically aloof. He was staring daggers when the two locked eyes, and his brother flashed a jackal grin. Thomas's shaggy strands brushed his broad shoulders like a seaweed-covered soccer ball. When James Harrington fell in step with his oldest son, they strode away without so much as a backward glance. Philip was abandoned once again, but he felt a wave of relief when he saw Arnold's blue jeans, tennis shoes, and Yankees cap. Straightening his back, he was buoyed by a sense that for the first time in his life, he was stepping away from his father instead of feeling sorry for himself because his father had stepped away from him. In anticipation of the room key, he raised his hand, palm open, but Arnold didn't seem to notice as he stomped back toward the dorm. With a furrowed brow, the boy glanced around and then, as if to no one in particular, he said, "Where's Mr. Harrington?" This fucking kid, Philip thought. Of all the servants to get along with his father, the butler's son had the one thing Philip could never buy. Jabbing his hand in the air, Philip yelled, "Just give me the key." Slowly, Arnold turned to face him. "I don't have it." "What?" "I went to the provost's office, just like Mr. Harrington said. His contact." Arnold cocked his head to one side, thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. "Talbot. Mr. Harrington's contact, Talbot, said he got the message too late." Philip knew nothing about this Talbot. What the hell was he going to do now? Seeing the confusion on Philip's face, Arnold arched his back and stretched his arm toward the center of the yard. "Your key is over there," he said, "with the rest of your packet." When Philip glanced in that direction, his eyes went wide. Even though he'd been outside for half an hour, he hadn't noticed that a line of students arched around a giant, white canvas tent. Arnold snorted. "Guess you got to get it yourself, just like everybody else." His grin turned into a clenched jaw when Philip gave him a sharp look. As if in apology, the boy said, "I can do it." As he turned around, he grunted under his breath, "You might want to watch your damn bags." In that instant, Philip wanted to be different from the rest of his family. He wanted to be the kind of person that people served without regret. "No," he said, "I'll do it." And then to himself he thought, "I'll be alone either way." When Arnold cocked his head, Philip was annoyed by the look of surprise on his face. Apparently, the little fucker was going to believe he was a privileged asshole no matter what he did. Philip raised his chin and thought about the boy's father. Ironically, Walter had been the example most of Philip's life of how to treat your kids. His stomach started to grumble as he joined the other students. Fortunately, the line moved along at a nice clip. Philip's friends from Dalton were meeting for lunch at 11. He checked his mobile. It was 10:52. He found Arnold in the lobby, leaning against the wall with his face buried in his phone. "Annenberg," Philip said. "Know where that is?" Arnold took the room key. "The dining hall?" "I'll be there when you're done." As Philip made to leave, he heard Arnold say, "I may need an ID to get in." God damn it, Philip thought, this kid would make a terrible butler. "Figure it out," he said before bursting through the door. The food court smelled of warm cheese, vegetables, and bacon. Philip was starving by the time he swiped his card and ordered his burger. It was like stepping into Hogwarts. The stained glass windows and vintage barn chandeliers lit so much light through the wooden rafters that the Tudor-styled room felt as large as a city block. Each long table had about a dozen chairs. Students from Philip's alma mater were sprinkled throughout the room, but the group he wanted wasn't there. Mouth-watering, Philip found a quiet corner near the wall. As he raised the burger to his face, two of the armchairs on the other side of the table and the chair next to Philip's thigh were grabbed. Their wooden legs made a scraping sound as 3 hands slid the chairs over the marble floor. Laura slid into the one directly across from Philip. "Can you believe all these fucking Asians?" she said. Jesus, Philip thought. Will she ever let that go? He scanned the room and, honestly, hadn't noticed that a large number of the students in the hall were either Chinese or Korean. Philip was friends with this group out of a shared disappointment with their families, but they'd agreed to bury the ugliness of their past today. Laura palmed a handful of brown hair, pushed it behind her ear, and looked around the table seeking agreement. A wicked grin took over Will's face as he lowered himself next to Laura. The look reminded Philip of a confidence shared during graduation. It was a video that included the two plus Carter. Laura had been insecure about Asian girls for as long as they could remember, and Will had used that insecurity to sucker her into a threesome. Will laughed.
They're the smartest kids in the country. We'd be fucked if we actually had to compete. Carter was hunched in the chair next to Phillip. It was unusual for the marijuana smell to be so faint, and yet his eyes were indeed droopy in the shadow of his Wu-Tang cap. He leaned to one side, took one of Phillip's frites, then mumbled, "We're the best. They're the brightest." Giving him a side-eyed glance, Phillip wondered whether Carter ever sat in a chair without slouching. This bigoted bullshit might be the sort of thing that Arnold attributed to Phillip, but his reaction to family regret had never involved animosity toward any group. If anything, Phillip's nerdy side was offended. Many of these students would go on to be doctors, scientists, and engineers, exactly the kind of people he wanted to meet. He didn't care whether they were Chinese, Korean, or Indian, as long as they were smart, hardworking, and ambitious. Bright-eyed Will and nervous Laura preferred white pearl. To grab a frite, Will's hand struck Phillip's plate with the speed of a python. "Meet your roommate yet?" Will said, popping the prize into his mouth. "No," Phillip said, before taking a bite of his burger. As they had in high school, Laura, Will, and Carter might make a name for themselves as the party kids, but in this, Phillip planned to leave distance between he and his friends. Will snatched another potato. "They paired me with a fucking hick." Laura took a frite, but instead of putting it in her mouth, she held it in front of her nose, as if she only meant to smell it. "He's from Atlanta," she said in a terrible mockery of a southern drawl. Carter's jaw rotated like a cow chewing cud. "Mine's black." "Where's he from?" Laura asked. When Carter shrugged, Will laughed. "As long as he smokes, you don't give a flying fuck, do you?" Phillip spied the hint of a grin as Carter chewed. "By the way," Will said, "Rat Pack is the theme." Phillip swallowed. "You're still going, right?" "Fuck yeah!" Will's shout drew attention from neighboring diners. An upperclassman who'd gone to Dalton was throwing a party, and you had to know the theme to get in. Guests, especially female guests, were highly encouraged. Laura was still holding the frite when she said, "I can't wait to see what Ellie wears." This was the one thing about their friendship. They were bastards to everyone else, but never to Ellie. "Me too," Phillip said, feeling good about their presence for the first time today. An arm arched over his shoulder. With his fist palm down, Arnold released the key. The tiny bit of metal clanged against a wooden table. "Your stuff's in the room," he said. By the time Phillip nodded, Arnold was already walking away. The others watched as the butler's son exited the hall. Letting her hand fall to the table, Laura said, "Mom keeps bugging me about unpacking." She let out a sigh and glanced down at her shirt. "I don't plan to wash. Once this is dirty, I'll just throw it away and buy a new one." Will laughed. "Better for your roommate, Miss Nelson. You're a fucking slob." Laura crossed her arms and leaned back in her seat. "Does Ellie like her roommate?" she asked. "Don't know," Phillip mumbled, his mouth full of food. "She's been with her mom and dad all day." The group fell silent. Ellie was the only one among them whose parents seemed to give a shit. "What's with your fucking brother?" Laura said. "I liked it better when he didn't notice me." Will turned to Laura, his face leering. Running his hand through his hair, he slung his arm around her chair. "Is that sweet little Laura?" he said, nailing Thomas's callous, condescending tone as he stared at Laura's shirt. She cringed and raised her arms from her stomach to her breast. "He's going to be at the party tonight, isn't he?" Still leering, Will bobbed his shoulders and nodded his head. "Baby, let me show you around campus." With a burst of laughter, Phillip's disappointment from earlier rose from his shoulders like a mist. Will and Carter joined in. Laura simply shook her head. She reached across the table, took another frite, and held it in front of her nose. "If you're not going to eat them," Phillip teased, "leave them alone." He was still smiling when he returned to Thayer Hall. Through a rapid exchange of texts, he shared the lunch conversation with Ellie. A laughing emoji popped on the screen. Ellie, Grub, Mom and Dad. Then they drive back to New York. Phillip, Rat Pack is the theme. He stared at the phone as if Ellie could see his hopeful expression. Ellie, Rat Pack, darn, I don't have anything in that theme. Maybe next time. Phillip's fingers struck the phone hard enough to break the screen. Phillip, yes you do. Ellie, I don't know, Phil. Phillip, you only live once. Laura, Will, and Carter will be there. Ellie, let's talk later. As he stepped through Thayer's front door, Phillip launched the Crimson Community app he'd installed earlier. The screen lit up, and Victor Dacos' face and student profile stared back. Students weren't allowed to choose roommates until their second year. Apparently, Phillip was about to share a room with a soccer fan who preferred Italian girls and had grown up in the Bronx. Manhattan was only a borough away, but Phillip's world was so exclusive that this was like being on his way to meet a student who'd flown in from another country. He clicked a tab at the top of the app, and the dorm's outline appeared on the screen with his room highlighted in yellow. 3rd floor, right next to the stairs. Glancing up, Phillip noted the crowd standing in front of the elevator. He continued past them, took the steps 2 at a time, and entered the hall on the 3rd floor. A girl stormed out of Phillip's room as he caught sight of the door. Her head was bowed, and her shoulder-length blonde hair and perky breasts bounced as she stomped in his direction. When she slammed into Phillip, he noticed the girl was crying. "Hey," he said, but she didn't look up. Phillip watched her red shorts and yellow tank top advance down the hall. Another person had poked his head out of the room. "Come on, Cassie, don't be like that." In an Italia t-shirt and black shorts, Victor folded his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "I'll be here tonight if you change your mind." He was staring at the girl's ass and grinning as Phillip stepped in front of the door. This close, Victor's ink-black hair seemed curly to the point of being absurd. His voice had been casual, but disappointment was clear on his face. Fucking jocks, Phillip thought, and their stupid fucking girlfriends. The scene encapsulated everything Phillip hated about high school, and on top of that, Victor was in his way. His shoulder was braced against one side of the doorframe, and his leg was stretched until the heel of his sneaker touched the other. Phillip wasn't sure what annoyed him more, being ignored or having someone in his way. "I'm Phillip Harrington," he said, "and this is my room." Victor's grin disappeared. He leaned away from the doorframe and stood in the center of the doorway. "Arnold said you were a prick." Suddenly, it was as if the entire campus was conspiring against Phillip. His father, haunting him like an apparition on the plane, Arnold's belligerence, his brother's unwelcome appearance, and now this wannabe king of the world. Like a bull whose eyes were burning with rage, Phillip no longer saw the teen named Victor, who was supposed to be his roommate. The metamorphosis was instant and complete. Curly hair became shaggy, 5 feet and 10 inches became 6, and the irritation of a set jaw gave way to a jackal grin. "Arnold said you were a prick," his brother repeated, following a lifetime of cruel, sadistic laughter. "No," Phillip growled, "not here." There was a flash of confusion on Victor's face at the very moment Phillip tried to shove his way into the room. It was like running into a brick wall. Phillip bounced off Victor's chest, and then, seconds later, he felt 2 hands grab his collar. "I don't know what the fuck somebody did to you, but I'm only going to say this once, Phillip." Victor pulled him so close their breaths mingled together. "Don't ever push me again."